A summary of building or constructing the test automation environment. We can select lots of different tools or platforms, in even the programming language that we are using to automate our test cases might be chosen based on lots of different decision criteria, even the structure of the teams that we are working together or that we are belonging to. But of course, eventually we can come up with the optimum decision and with the best alternatives that is providing the best performance and the easiest implementation, and of course the best ease of understandability, ease of use, and ease of implementation, of course. But let's summarize what we can use. Let's starting from the programming language, like we can use Java, and we can use lots of different test automation frameworks and test runners with these languages. For example, with Java, we can use TestNG, but if we go with Python, of course, we can use PyTest as a test runner and the test framework. And there are some test runners which are working or supporting JavaScript, basically Jest or Mocha. And if we use one of those, sometimes we might have to use additionally some assertion libraries. For example, if we go with Mocha, then we might use Chai or any other assertion library. But some others already have built-in assertion libraries. For example, if we decide to use Jest, then we don't have to import any other assertion library because we can already use the built-in methods or the functions for our assertions in our test cases. And if we use one of these, then of course we should use some other libraries for automating our API queries or the UI steps, because these are only the test runners and some framework for test execution, but of course not for automating the UI or the API actions or parsing the responses. So for that purpose, we can use different frameworks and different libraries like requests or Apache client libraries. And for the UI, we can use Selenium or any other wrapper of Selenium or some other framework. But instead of all these, we can use some end-to-end test automation frameworks, because these are libraries or the frameworks in which we can find already the test runner and even the UI and the API automation libraries. This is why they are called as E2E test automation frameworks. If we, for example, if we use Cypress, we don't have to use any external UI automation library like Selenium, because we can already use the methods built inside Cypress. Or similarly, we don't have to import or use any external assertion library because there are already some built-in assertion functions. And like in most of all these E2E test automation frameworks like Playwright or Nightwatch or some others, similarly, we can use just all the functions or the functionalities built inside these frameworks. But which one can be the best in our test automation library? Which one can meet our requirements? Actually, it depends, right? It depends on the requirements that we have, like which browsers we want to execute or what kind of performance criteria we have. All of them have some different strengths and different weaknesses. Actually, I had made a comparison and a benchmark study among like 4 or 5 of them. Those are the locomotive EUT frameworks commonly used in the community. So I had summarized some highlights of them, and we can see lots of different execution parameters which can pass while we are executing tests with these frameworks, and we can see some basic functionalities, which one of them are supporting which of these functionalities. And I had measured some execution durations as well. But in our previous classes, we basically discussed about Cypress and Playwright, because those are, I guess, the first two which are mostly used in the testing community. Cypress is a little bit older than Playwright, but I guess Playwright is getting more and more famous and being widely used in the testing community. But let's remember the fundamental highlights of these two frameworks. In Cypress, actually in both Cypress and Playwright, what we were able to do is basically just finding the elements, which we call as locating the elements. For that purpose, we have to use the locators. Locators is just the addresses of the elements on the page. Whenever we are doing the manual testing, first of all, we visually find by our eyes where the elements are. That we want to interact with, right? So similarly, we have to let the automation code know where the element is that we want to interact with. So we have to pass the address. This address of the elements on the page is called as locator. So whenever we are constructing the locators, we have to pass some string values, which are called as selectors. We can use different types of selectors. We can use the tag name, the tag type, or we can use the class name, or even we can use the XPath of each element on the page. But on top of those, of course, we can use several attributes or even combining different attributes of elements on the page to find them, to locate them. And then we can make some interactions with them, like we can click to those found elements, or we can clear if it is a text area or text field. And we can do some other interactions like typing, check, uncheck, or selecting them. But how can we basically locate the elements? Is first of all, we get them, we find them, and then if it is a list of elements, then we can get all the children, because sometimes there's a hierarchy on the page. There is a division, and inside the division there is lots of elements, or maybe there is a list, and inside the list there is list items. So there's a hierarchy. Sometimes there's the parent element, then there is the children. So we can get children, or inside this list, or inside this locator, we can further go down and find more elements which is found, or which is met by the queries that we have made. So we can further continue to query more, to filter down by adding some more constraints, like which contains some specific attributes, or we can pass find to pass another locator here, or we can basically just pass index, or we can just iterate over the list, right? We just get all the elements meeting this requirement, or the constraint, or the filter that we are making, and then over each of them we can just iterate to perform our test steps. And what we are passing inside this finding or getting method, it should be the locator. And how can we construct our locators? We should pass the selectors, which are made from the parent element and then tag name and the class name and some other attributes. But inside even the locator, like if we first get some elements, and then we can further narrow down our criteria with some additional methods. But instead of these, even inside the locator, we can do this further filtering as well without using an additional function or method. So we just basically continue the selectors that we are making. Inside the selector string, we just continue by typing some more constraints like this. It should be visible, because sometimes there are some hidden elements, and if we want to select the one which is visible, then we just continue like this, or we just basically select a certain number of index inside the parent element or inside the list of elements. So this was basically the pattern, or the format that we can use with Cypress. If we use the locator inside the finding methods, then most probably it will be almost same in Playwright. Of course, there will be some minor syntax differences. For example, instead of just passing the locator, we can use some methods introduced by Playwright. For example, instead of just passing the name attribute key and the value, which will be the name of the element, just pass or just call the function named as get elements by name. Or similarly, we can use get by test ID. So instead of just typing the key of the attribute, which would be in this case ID, and the value of the attribute, which would be the ID itself, just call the relevant function. But of course, there are some shortcuts in Playwright as well. We can still pass the locator, but again, just type a hash character to just represent the ID of the element. So the rest would be almost same, like for example, we can narrow down our queries by typing additional filters or the attributes, but like we can make an hierarchical call as well. But again, most of the time, the locators or the selectors that we are using would be almost same or very similar in Playwright and Cypress.